Welcome, everybody. I'm Sandy. I'm a volunteer with Food Up Front, and we uh, are working to get people to grow their own food in the city. Now, I live in sort of west downtownish Toronto, and I'm on the sixth floor on a balcony. So I was looking at how I can grow my own food. And then when we started talking about some of the workshops that we might be doing this year, we were looking at doing them in people's gardens. And I said, hey, we should do a balcony gardening one. So here I am doing a balcony gardening one. I am not a professional gardener. I've made lots of mistakes on the stuff that I do, but I just hoping to give you a little bit of inspiration in how this works. So I'm going to start out with a couple of things. Now we are just a few little housekeeping things. Please keep your microphone and your camera off. If you have a question, you can type it into the chat window, and Nova will be reading the questions later on as we go. Then there's going to be a lot of references that we have to different things, and we're going to be publishing a email out or something on our webpage that has references to some of the things that we talked about today. So we'll also be able to have the video available so that you can see the video at a later time if you want to. So just to start out, I really wanted to grow peppers and tomatoes and herbs and some greens. So that's mostly what I'm growing here or will be growing this summer. It's still early in the growing season, so I'm mostly just planting things. And a lot of the stuff I planted yesterday. This is one of my veggie pod gardens. I love these. They are a little bit expensive, although I picked up one on Facebook Marketplace from somebody secondhand and at a very good price. So if you can get it at a good price, it's great. This one is on wheels, so I can move it around. And it has this cover, which is great because it's got even this heavy plastic cover so that I can plant things now and they'll be protected like they're in a little greenhouse. And then I can take the plastic cover off and it's got a mesh cover underneath that keeps insects and birds and stuff away. So these are pretty good. It's also quite deep. If you're growing things like tomatoes or peppers, they need to have a deep enough root structure. So you want to have something that's fairly deep. Whereas I also have some railing planters that are great for doing herbs and so on, but might not have the depth that you need to hold a whole big top heavy tomato plant. So I'm going to start out, first of all, with some seedlings, and then we'll talk about things as we go along, just about sun exposure, about what to plant. Lots of people put great questions in when we, in the sign up, we had a place for you to put questions in the sign up form. And so there's an opportunity to ask questions in addition to those, and we'll get through to all those questions as we go along. So let's say you don't start seeds from scratch, but that you buy seedlings at a store. And right now, if you go out, any of the grocery stores you go into or a garden center will have seedlings. Now I've started my own seedlings, and I'll get to that in a minute. And so I have a couple of them. I planted a couple yesterday that aren't doing so well, and hopefully they'll recover. But I have mine now planted in these little peat pots. And now I'm just going to take them out of the peat pots and plant them into the veggie pod. So it's pretty simple. In here, I have a good potting mix. You want potting mix rather than soil you dig out of the ground because it's got things like vermiculite in it that make it a little bit lighter. And I've also put earthworm castings on here, basically worm poop, which I get, and you can get quite a big bag of it for around $20 or so. And it really helps with putting a lot of nutrients in the soil. So I'm going to start with these little guys here. And what I do is if I have things planted in the peat pot, I usually cut the pot open or tear the pot open so that although the roots will go through it, I think it helps the roots grow a little better if there's just a little bit of place for them to grow. So then it's just a matter of digging a spot. You want to make sure it's deep enough and putting your seedling in. Again, this can be a seedling you just buy from the grocery store or a garden center, or it could be one that you've started yourself. You put it in there. You tamp it down. We'll do the second one here. Whoops, my scissors are falling apart. So a couple of things you'll want to have when you're gardening. You might want a pair of gardening gloves because otherwise you get a lot of potting soil underneath your hands. And you want a trowel. This is really kind of the only tool I have, the only sort of dedicated garden tool I have aside from a trimmer is is a trowel. And this is a, this is a reasonable one. It's sort of a Canadian Tire one. So it's not super expensive, but you'll want something that you can dig around in the soil with. So I'm going to plant these guys down. Hopefully they're going to recover a bit. I'll have to do a follow-up video for my plants and you can see whether they recover. And one of the things that you always want to do after you plant something is you want to make sure that it's well watered. So they really need the water to get kind of kick-started. And so I'm going to give these a little bit of water. Now these are also in a self-watering pot. So this big veggie pod container has a water reservoir in the bottom. And I've put quite a bit of water in already. I can feed it down through this tube, or just by watering, it'll filter down through. And then eventually the plants will start to draw it up from there. And I really like self-watering containers. I have about 3 different kinds out here that I could show you. I really like the self-watering containers because one of the problems with balcony containers is you're only dealing with a small amount of potting soil, and it dries out really quickly. So I have a western, slightly southwestern exposure, huge amount of sun in the summertime, and I need to make sure that there's a ton of water on these, or else they'll just dry out and then they'll flop over and they'll be dead in a day. So by having these self-watering containers that have the reservoir underneath, I'm able to go away for a couple of days if I want to, or not have to worry about watering for a couple of days. So that's something to consider. Now, we did have some questions about condo rules. And of course, I wanted to be very cognizant of the condo rules where I am, and probably where you are too, if you're growing in an apartment or a condo. And one of the usual things is that you can't have water running over the edge of your balcony. So we have people below us, for like 4 floors below us, and they don't really want our plants dripping on them. So with these, they have an overflow outlet, and I just have that running in a hose down into a jar, so that if I water it too much, it will overflow into the jar, and then I can empty the jar rather than having it spilling over the edge of the balcony. So you just want to be careful about that. So the self-watering is good for those 2 reasons. One is that once you get the reservoir filled up, you're not putting a lot of extra water in, and then it's also it sort of controls the overflow that you're doing. So then the second thing would be about starting seeds. So this is if you've got seedlings. It's pretty easy. You kind of dig, plant, water. You want to make sure you've got good soil. I will say I'm a little bit picky about where I buy my potting soil, because I have bought stuff in the past and it has had eggs for insects in it, unfortunately. And then it takes me a month to clean that out, because I don't like to use insecticides on anything that I'm eating. So I have to use sort of natural methods for getting rid of the insects and so on. So you just better to buy a good quality potting soil that's going to be clean. And I'll have some recommendations of ones that work. And then a natural fertilizer like the worm casting, so that you're not putting chemical fertilizers on things. If it was like just flowers you were growing, it's a little bit different. You can put things on there that you don't have to worry about if you weren't going to eat them. But this is food we're talking about. You don't want to put anything on here that is going to impact your ability to eat what you get out of here. So if we go back to starting seeds then, you can start seeds in a lot of different ways. There are some things that you can sow directly as seeds in the ground, and I will show you a little bit of an example of that. But things like peppers and tomatoes, I like to get started ahead of time, several weeks ahead of time, so that when I plant them, they're already a plant, and then they grow pretty quickly. Now, you can do it in a lot of different ways. I have a little hydroponic unit. So I've just taken the basin off of the hydroponic unit. Normally there's like a light that's over the top of this, but you can do it in a seed starting tray indoors. You can do it in a baggie with a damp paper towel. There's lots of ways to start the seeds. But what I've done is these are mostly tomatoes here, and then I'll show you what we have to do after that. So if I pull this up, you can see we have lots of healthy roots there. So I'm going to take one of these tomato plants, and then I'm going to plant it into a peat pot like this. So then these are the ones I'm going to keep these inside for another couple of weeks. It's still a little bit chilly at night, and I worry about whether we can really have, stuff outdoors without being covered over with like this heavy plastic cover. So I'll keep these indoors for another couple of weeks, and then I'll plant them outside. So I have a big bag of my potting soil down here. I'll just do it right on top here. And then I'm going to grab one of these little guys out of here. And so these are in little, these are actually made of sphagnum moss, the little sponges that are used in the AeroGarden. So they are organic and biodegradable. They don't always degrade over the course of the summer though. So I find when I dig up the plants in the fall that there's often a little bit of that sponge left. Okay, so I'm just going to put it in there. And with these ones, when you take seeds and you first put them into soil, you have to keep them super wet. So this I'm gonna water now, but then I'm gonna put it back inside and I'm gonna keep it in a tray of water for a day or two, because to acclimatize from a fully hydroponic environment, or if you're just sprouting them in paper towels or something, you just want to be careful that they're moving from a very water-rich environment to now this spotting soil. It's like a big shock on them, right? It's the same when you're ready to move them outdoors, is you don't want to just put them outdoors and have them exposed right away, is you need to have them acclimatize a little bit to the outdoors. So if you get seedlings that are like the ones that I had that have already been sitting outside at a garden center or something, they're fine, just move them straight outdoors. But if you have ones like this, so this is now going to go back inside and stay inside for a few days or probably a couple of weeks. With this, I'll bring it out gradually every day. So I'll have them on a tray and I'll bring them out and I'll let them get out a little bit every day and then take them back in again. Part of that is to keep them from getting too cold at night, but they can also get too much sunlight. So you can have them get basically a sunburn if you bring them out too soon. So because they're kind of delicate, right? So they're like little babies, right? You have to make sure that they just get acclimatized or what's called hardening off. So you want to harden them off by having them come outside a little bit at a time. And then 3 or 4 weeks from now, these guys will come out. And since these tomatoes are climbers, they're going not into one of these, but into a more open pot or a open planter that has a trellis on it, so that they can grow up, because they'll grow to 6 or 7 feet tall. And they'll have lots of tomatoes on them, which is great. So that's sort of the basics of, with the starting the seeds. Like I said, you can get these little hydroponic units. This one is from a company called AeroGarden. You can, if you wanted to buy one new, you can get them from Canadian Tire. You can get them on Amazon. But again, a lot of these available on Facebook Marketplace secondhand. So you can get one of these. And then this one has a seed starter tray in it, but normally it would have 6 pods where you can grow things indoors all year round. So I also use it for growing little small dwarf tomatoes, for growing herbs and that sort of thing indoors when I'm not using it for starting seeds. I have a couple of these. Okay, so that's like the seed starter. As I said, you can also get seed starter trays that are basically just keep the seeds damp and covered, so that they can start to sprout. And then when they start to sprout and they start to get little leaves, then you can start looking at planting them into soil, like I've done with the peat pots here. And then you let them grow a little bit, keep them indoors, give them lots of light. And then when they're ready and it's warm enough outside, you can move them outside.
If I may, Sandy,
Yep.
maybe I can show the folks the seed starting tray that I got from Dollarama.
Oh yes, please.
An example. Okay, so there we go. I'll just turn off my video. So if you're looking for more affordable options in terms of first starting your seeds and stuff, I got this at Dollarama for $5, and it's a legitimate item. It has little biodegradable peat pots. It's sold at like a lot of other places as well, but for more money. So this comes with this little seed starting tray right here, as well as slightly larger pots. You also get some plant labels, and it has the tray itself that it will sit in, as well as a plastic cover. It's kind of nested into it right now, but it has a plastic cover that you would then put on top, so that then you can maintain those moisture levels like Sandy was talking about. It doesn't really have the height for allowing them to grow taller, but it is a good base starting point.
Oh yeah, all you need is enough room for them to sort of get sprouted.
Yeah.
And then they're big enough to start to put into the little pots like this. So then you move them into these pots, and then you don't have to get these peat pots, but if you do get them as part of your sprouting kit, then yes, you can kind of either sprout them in some sprouting medium, put them into the peat pots and soil, or sprout them directly in this, depending on the type of seeds. And then when you're ready to go, just as I showed, just cut the peat pot open a little bit so that the roots can get out more easily and just bury it right in the ground. You can also use, like I see some people who use like just like plastic cups or something to do them indoors, like the solo cups, like the red ones. And they poke a hole in the bottom so that they can drain through. And then obviously those are reusable. So you would take it out of that cup before you plant it in. So, and then you can reuse it. These are, I find, a little bit easier, and they seem to promote the growth really well. So that's good with that. All right, so that's kind of the seed starting and a little bit about the hydroponics. I really, if you're in an apartment and you want to grow stuff year round, I really recommend looking at hydroponic setups. I started with one and now I have three. So they're a little bit addictive that way, but they're a really good way to have fresh herbs and some smaller vegetables. Like I said, I have some dwarf variety of tomatoes that are growing now, so that we can really get the whole benefit of this all year round. So I've been picking tomatoes now for about 3 or 4 months off my dwarf tomatoes, and we had dinner the other night where I had a big bowl of tomatoes, and I was able to use them to make dinner, and I have fresh herbs that I can cut into things that I cook as well. So that, I think, is it for this. I do want to show some of the other planters, and I want to show also planting directly into soil. So I'm going to ask my videographer to follow me around here. I'm going to take all of this and we're going to go over to the other veggie pod. Okay, so in this one I'm doing greens. I don't know, can you get a view around there? And with greens, so I have some arugula and I have Swiss chard. And with these, I plant directly in the soil because they germinate really quickly and they come up. And the thing I like about arugula in particular is that it comes up really quickly, and I can constantly crop the small leaves off, like what you would buy as baby arugula in the store. So I'm constantly cropping them off once they come up. And I can also do alternating rows a couple of weeks apart so that I always have fresh crops of them. So the greens are like super easy to grow. They're one of the things you can also sow directly from seeds. So with these, I've done arugula in half, and I have some Swiss chard here. I'm going to plant too. And so I just put a marker to say that I'd planted everything on this side already. So basically I take my trowel. This is why I think the trowel is the most valuable tool in the box here. And I just make a little tiny trough like that. You don't want the seeds to be buried too deeply. And oh, look at that. I had no idea what these look like. So these are Swiss chard. There's not that many of them, but of course they grow kind of big. So I'm going to plant about 3 in a row here, like that. And then I'm going to cover them over. So I just barely cover them. I'm going to move my little marker so I remember where I am. And then water. So these guys also need a lot of water. So because you want them to start germinating. If you think about that seed starter tray, the idea is that you start seeds in a very moist environment. So basically with these ones, since we're starting them in here, we want to give them this very moist environment. You can also see how rich the soil looks. That's because I put a big layer of the worm castings on the top. So I can show you the bag. This is the earthworm castings that I use. This stuff is great for reconditioning the soil. This year, because this is my 3rd year for the balcony gardening, I dug out maybe 10% of the soil in all of my containers, and I just topped them up with this. This is from Pure Life Soil. It's available. We'll give some references of where you can get this too. But this works really, really well in terms of providing basic fertilizer, and it's kind of enriching your soil. So that's for planting seeds directly in the ground as well. We had a lot of questions about what people could plant. Some of it was based on like what exposure you had, whether you faced west or north or south or whatever. And there was one person who had a question about things that were really windy. So with things like with greens are really easy to grow, and most greens will grow pretty nicely in partial shade as well as sun. Now, even if you have a north-facing balcony in Toronto, of course, in the summertime, the sun does come in more. You should get a bit of sun either morning or afternoon. in. So as long as you can position it where it gets a little bit of sunlight and then a lot of natural light during the day, then greens should grow fine in a north-facing balcony. I'm lucky to have this sort of southwest exposure where tomatoes, peppers, and things grow really well. We did have a comment from or a question from one person about it being really windy. They had a south balcony, but being really windy. And in that case, you want to look at things that aren't going to get top-heavy fruit on them. So things like tomatoes or peppers will be a bit of a challenge because as they grow kind of taller plants and they grow like the heavy fruit on them, and a wind is going to knock them over. And I have that problem sometimes if I don't have the covers down on these guys. So you can try getting something that has a cover, which will block the wind, or you can grow things that aren't going to get knocked over. One of them is green. So the arugula and Swiss chard, like I planted here, or kale or anything else, spinach, that type of thing, that's going to be fine in a windy environment. Also, think about things that grow under the soil so that they're not going to be worried about the wind. So radishes, beets, turnips, carrots, potatoes even. All of those things can be grown successfully in containers on your balcony. Very loud motorcycle going by. And if you have a sunny exposure, you can grow any of those really successfully. And if it's windy, then it's only the leaves on the top that are going to get blown around, but they're not going to get knocked over like it would with tomatoes or peppers. So that's been a little bit about planting just directly into soil. Again, this one is for those of you who were a little late. These are these things called veggie pods. Love these guys. They have a reservoir for water in the bottom so that you can add a lot of water, and then eventually the plants, as the roots grow, they pull the water up from the reservoir, and then you don't need to water them as often. So they'll be good for a week or even 2 weeks, depending on whether you have the cover closed or not on these two. Now, they do have an overflow, and again, we were talking about this earlier. I have a tube on the overflow. Can you see that on the camera? I have a tube on the overflow, and I put it down into a jar in the bottom because I don't want to be a bad person for my neighbors, and so I want to make sure that there's no overflow onto the balconies below me or the terraces below me. Okay, so I want to look at some other self-watering containers that I have. So these ones that are on the railing, these ones I don't have anything planted in yet, but I'll do some herbs likely in these. These are, I got these ones at Lee Valley, but Nova, you had a link to get these from Home Hardware, I think, as well. Good price, about $20 each. These also have a reservoir in the bottom. They hold about 1 liter of water in the bottom. Now they will overflow eventually, so you still need to have something underneath them when you're watering them to catch any extra. But these are great. So they're adjustable. So you can see I have quite a wide railing here, but there's adjustable things, so they go from very narrow to very wide. And there's a little foot at the bottom to hold against the railing, so you can level them no matter what your railing configuration is. I've had these maybe 4 or 5 years. I had them before in our previous place, which had only a Juliet balcony. So I had them hanging over the edge of a Juliet balcony. We didn't even have a proper balcony like this. And they were great. I grew little tomato plants in them and some herbs and so on. So these are great if you have just a tiny balcony. There were some questions from people about what do you grow if you have a really small balcony, or how do you grow if you have a really small balcony? Things like this are good. I have them hanging on the inside so that if I do overwater, I can catch the drips, or I can take them right off and put them on top of a tray and do the watering. And then once they finish dripping, I can put them back. Some places have regulations. You can't have things hanging over the edge of your balcony. So it's going to depend on what's allowed in your particular condo or apartment building. So those are definitely some possibilities too. Now, the last of the self-watering planters that I want to show you is this one. This is where my tomatoes will go eventually. And this is from a company called Life Space Gardens. They're in BC, and they do everything out of cedar. And it's a really beautiful planter. Again, a little bit pricier, and I've just put tomato cages on top. And then we built our own trellis using bamboo sticks that come from, I think, from Canadian Tire. So there was, this is all like tomato cages from Home Hardware and trellis. And last year, my tomato plants were up as tall as the top of the trellis. So just as they grew, I just used some stuff to wire them onto the trellises as they go up. Again, this has a reservoir in the bottom. it's got a little hole built in, and I like this one because it's got a float. So you can tell how much water is left in there by how high the hummingbird is floating. And we put a mark on so we could tell when the reservoir was full, so that before it hit there is an overflow valve before it hits the overflow valve. So these are kind of options for self-watering things that you can buy. Now you can also, there's do-it-yourself videos and instructions online for how to do your own self-watering container in any kind of container that you have. There's also, and I'll put something in the references, also available from Lee Valley, but probably from other places, there's a self-watering insert that you get, and it can go into any 5-gallon bucket. So you get a 5-gallon bucket, you know, one of the buckets that's like this size, from Canadian Tire, Home Hardware, Home Depot, wherever. And then you buy these self-watering inserts, and they go down and they create that reservoir space in the bottom. And then they have a tube that you do the watering, and then you punch a hole through the bucket that will be the overflow, so that it will do the overflow. So it really creates one of these in a bucket at a much lower cost. So it's a good chance to kind of do your own. Now I have these little cedar ones that I really liked, except they don't hold the water in at all. So I've been doing some experimenting with creating my own self-watering, and I've done it with these two. And what I've done is I put a plastic container in the bottom, I put a tube up. I ran out of the tubing, so I still need to run some tubing down, but I put just a plastic container in the bottom. And then I've used, I could use plastic and punch some holes in, but I use landscape fabric. So landscape fabric is used when you want to create kind of a layer within your yard or something to contain things, but it is permeable, so the water will go through it. But this way I can water down into the reservoir. There's a reservoir in the bottom, and that water will be pulled up and used to water the plants. So these were things I had. This is a Thai basil plant I had growing inside. I had it in hydroponics. I just planted it yesterday. It's looking pretty good. It's really hard to kill those things. These were chives. These chives were actually in that veggie over the winter, looked like they had totally died, and now they've completely come back. So I came out, I opened the top, and it's like, look at that, there's chives. So they existed, and many things like that will either self-seed or they will keep over the winter if you have a cover over them. So what I had this heavy veggie plastic cover over the top, and that created enough of a little greenhouse. I was cutting fresh chives until December or January, and then I thought they had died off, but then I came out in March or early April, and they were back again, and now they're huge. So I just pulled them up out of that and planted them in one of these, and now we have fresh chives and fresh basil for cooking. So I think that's it for kind of what I'm going to demonstrate. Actually, let me show you the plants that look a little, these ones, as I said, we have a few that are not looking so good, but I'll show you my other pepper plants. If you want to come around here, these were another type of peppers. So I planted these seedlings yesterday. These were ones I started in the hydroponics, and then they got to a certain size. I moved them into the peat pots. Let's let the camera get settled down there. And then they stabilized in the peat pots, and I planted them yesterday, and they're ready to go here. So they're looking really good. I expect I'm going to start to see blossoms on these because it's quite warm under this cover. I'll probably start to see blossoms on these within another week or so. And then I have a couple more of those. I put wildflowers in these. These are a little bit less accessible because they're tucked beside the barbecue. So I just do some flowers here, and that helps to attract the pollinators as well. So one of the things you will find with things like tomatoes and peppers, they're good because they're self-pollinating, which means that a flower can pollinate, a single blossom can pollinate itself. So all it needs is a little bit of movement, like from the breeze, and it'll pollinate itself. But if you have something like a lot of different kinds of cucumbers and squash have male and female flowers, and that's when either you need to watch for it and do some hand pollination, or you need to have the little bees coming around and insects that go in there and move the pollen from one to the other. So having wildflowers helps to attract, even on the 6th floor where we are, it helps to attract the pollinators. So we will get lots of little bees up here that are buzzing around and go to all the blossoms. And then when I take the tops off these eventually, then they can visit all of these blossoms as well. One year, the first year, I had sunflowers, and we actually had a pair of goldfinches the birds that like to visit the sunflowers, and they would sit on the flowers and eat the seeds out of the flowers. So lots of possibilities for what you can grow on a balcony. Okay, so I think that's it for the demonstration. Nova, do you want to? We'll just get the camera back in place here. Do you want to open up for questions? Do you have some questions there?
Yeah, so maybe I will start with the ones that people have brought up in the chat, and then we'll move on to the ones that people left in the form.
Okay.
So
yeah, some of the ones from the form I addressed already because I saw those ahead of time. So yeah.
exactly. Okay. Yeah, so one of the first questions we had was like, how long ago did you start your seedlings? I kind of answered to that it will depend on the plant, how long it needs before it transplants, and you did talk about hardening them a little bit. But would you have any other like general recommendations of what people should look for before transplanting?
Sure. So the pepper seeds, these biggest ones that I did, I started those probably about 2 months ago, and then put them into the peat pots about 2 weeks ago. So they had about 6 weeks in the hydroponics. So they were started in the hydroponic seed starter, but anything will work. And then move them into the peat pots. So if you're looking at planting now with something, if you really want to get a kickstart on things like peppers or tomatoes, you might want to buy the seedlings from a lot of grocery stores have them now. So you can buy them from there, but next year you can plan to start them a little bit earlier. It's not too late to start them. Like definitely you can get them started now, and you'll have things by the end of, by the probably midsummer, you'll be having some things. So definitely not too late to get started. Oh, one thing I didn't mention is about where the seeds come from. So a bunch of the seeds, so my tomato seeds and some of my pepper seeds, they all come from things that I grew last year. So we are going to be having a seed starting workshop that's coming up. It's going to be an in-person workshop, and there's lots of resources as well on seed starting, on how to save your seeds and then use them in the next year. So some of the seeds I purchased, and some of the seeds are things that I saved from year to year.
That's awesome. Great. Yeah. Also for anyone curious about like what seeds we will be providing, we are in the middle of doing an inventory of what we have, but then hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we will be able to organize getting seeds out to folks. But if you do want to get a head start on growing, like, of course, you're not limited to the seeds we're going to provide. You're welcome to go and get your own seedlings. We did have questions about like fertilizer. So you did mention earthworm castings as like a soil component for adding soil nutrients, but do you ever use any other soil fertilizer additives?
I do for, let me just, don't move the camera. I'm just gonna see if I have them here. So I do use tomato spikes mid-season. So there's this brand called Job's tomato spikes. I'm not sure if I have any in here. I may have used them all last year. Oh, there, actually, that's the, so I have some of the Miracle Grow. So this is plant food that's particularly for things like tomatoes and so on. Or you can get, there's the little spikes that come in a pack and you just push them down in the soil. So with this, it just it's a powder, just gets dissolved in whatever you're watering, and then you put it over. The earthworm castings will be great for, certainly a couple of months, and then you might want to give them a little bit of a boost. Like when they start to have fruit on them, that's when they really need the nutrients. So when you start to see them having fruit, the peppers or the tomatoes, that's a good time to start putting some additional nutrients on, because they really need the nutrients. They're also going to need a lot of water then too. They're going to be really thirsty then.
Yeah. Does the same thing apply to like leafy greens? Do you find that those need as much nutrients as well, or are they usually fine?
I don't. I find they're fine as long as you have good soil that they're planted in. Like last year, I grew the arugula, and I didn't add anything to the soil there. So with that, there was worm castings, there was good quality potting soil. And the potting soil, by the way, I use that same company, their potting soil, the Pure Life soil, which is available you can buy it directly from them, but there's a few places like Home Hardware that sell it as well, and hydroponic stores that sell it. So just start with a good potting mix. and some worm castings, and then you've got a very rich soil. And the greens don't seem to need as many of the nutrients as something that has that bears fruit like tomatoes or peppers.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Next kind of question. You did speak a little bit too about protecting from insects by, covering plants, but if people are going to be doing more open planters or they don't have the ability to cover them, is there anything else you would recommend? Like, I know that I personally have used a neem oil mixture to spray onto plants to help prevent things like
neem oil. Yeah, neem oil is
yeah.
a great suggestion, Nova. It's just
Yeah.
I've never used neem oil, but I know that it's something that can be used because it's recommended sometimes with people in the hydroponic forums online and so on. They say to use neem oil. Now, what I did use, so last year I got that third Vegepod at the beginning of the summer, and it was kind of, I'd already had everything else planted, and it's like, oh, I just need some potting soil. So I rushed off to Canadian Tire and bought a big bag of potting soil. And then it turned out that it had some insects in it. So I didn't want to put anything chemical on. So I realized I still have the box here. So it had what were probably fungus gnats. So I have this stuff, which is a fungus gnat natural thing. They're called nematodes. So I think I used it all. I just have the empty box so that I know what I have here. So I ordered these online, but you can get them at garden centers as well. And with nematodes, they're natural in that they're a little, I don't even really know what they are. Probably somebody who knows more biology than me would be able to say. But basically, you put them in water and it sort of activates them, and then you water it, and they're a living organism. And they basically attack and eat the eggs they mostly eat the eggs in the soil, so that whatever is there, like that current generation, will die out, but their eggs won't grow again. And they're completely safe in terms, because it's not like a chemical pesticide. So I think you just have to be careful. Like the neem oil, there are soaps as well. There's this insecticidal soap, there's a lot of different brands. This is Safer's, which is a common brand. There's a lot of different ones of these. This is safe to put on, but I would say if you use this, then just wash the stuff before you eat it. If you're using it kind of within a day or two after you've done the spray. This is basically like a detergent type soap that goes on there, and it impacts the insects. I've also used, when I had that poor Vegepod full of insects, is I got those little sticky things. So there's these little sticky traps, and I had them all through that. I just stuck them on little sticks all through there. So the nematodes were under the soil killing the eggs, but of course the insects themselves, the flying insects, were attacking the leaves on my arugula. So the sticky traps caught most of those ones as well. So it's really like, because we're growing food here, you really want to be careful about what you put on it, because you're going to be eating it. So just if you're looking at putting something on there to help control insects, then that's definitely something to consider. You can also, even if you don't have a cover, with a covered thing like this, is you can rig up, if you have a problem with birds or with insects of various sort, you can usually rig something up around your planters. All you would need to do is create some kind of like a metal frame. You could even use something like one of those tomato cages, and then put some netting around and just tie it off. And that still lets the breeze through, it still lets the sunlight through, but it'll keep most of the insects out, and it'll keep birds out as well.
Awesome. Okay. There was one specific question that Carol asked. I don't know if you could speak to this. Do you know anything about what Epsom salt does for plants?
I don't. I've never heard of using Epsom salt on plants. Like I said, I'm not really a gardening specialist, but Epsom salts, I think, would tend to make it more alkaline. I'm trying to remember some of my chemistry,
Probably
but it's been a long
affecting
time.
the soil pH.
Yes.
That might be something that Google can maybe answer a little bit better than us, Carol. But yeah, you don't need anything too complicated or too fancy to really get started.
Definitely you want to think about pH. I know that the soil pH, there are things you can get to measure the pH of the soil. And tomatoes, for example, like to be in a certain environment, and our tap water in Toronto is pretty much neutral from a pH standpoint. So if you want it to be more acidic or more alkaline, then you might need to add something to balance to it. So take a look online for whatever it is you're growing, what kind of pH that it likes. And if it looks like it's not doing that well, then maybe get something to test the pH of your soil, and then something to adjust the pH. So that's probably what the Epsom salts is doing, is adjusting the pH.
Great. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, in the form, we did have someone ask about overwintering seeds. Later this summer, or possibly in the early fall, we will be hosting a seed saving workshop. So at that workshop, that's where we'll really be able to give like a full-on rundown about how to save your own seeds, and then overwinter them and save them for the next year, and also what that would mean to if you say have perennial fruits as well, what that would mean to make sure that the plants can stay through the winter. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, we've talked about water. So some people were asking about, yeah, options for watering if they're away. We have talked about the self-watering systems as well, but sometimes there are, what are they called? Little cartridges that you can like attach to a water bottle or something that just like it sticks into the planter as well. That's an option.
I've seen people take one of those pet watering containers, that has a big jug of water on it, and then a bowl from the pet to drink from. Take one of those and rig it up so it will feed the water into either a hydroponic unit or into a soil unit. So yeah, you can look at a couple different things. One of the things I've seen is that with soil is you can get a big, like a 2-liter bottle, like a Coke bottle or whatever, and poke a couple of little holes in the lid, fill it up with water, and then turn it upside down and bury it in the soil. And then the water very slowly drips out of the bottle, so that you kind of got a little bit of a self-watering system in that case. So then you just need to have it stick down into the soil a couple of inches so that it will drain out, and then you can see how much water is left. So try that. If you don't have a self-watering planter, that's one way to kind of do some self-watering.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, it seems like you've mostly spoken to container sizes for different plants. You did mention things like doing more root vegetables. With those, you would probably need like a quite deep, large container, right?
Yeah, things like, like this Vegepod is deep enough to do root vegetables, so I could do, carrots or beets or whatever in here. But those little ones like on the railing, you could do something like probably radishes in those, so a smaller root vegetable. You're not going to do potatoes. You need to have something quite deep for potatoes. But there's also these grow bags you can get for potatoes. You've probably seen, like, I was at Canadian Tire, I think, the other day, and they had some grow bags. And with those, they're just a bag that's got a bit of a frame around it so that it holds upright, and you fill it with soil. And it's sort of naturally, if you water too much, it's going to leak out around it. So you will need to have it on some drainage. But that's great if you want to do something like potatoes that needs deeper, sort of a deeper soil environment, because you need to have a couple of feet for potatoes. But I think that with root vegetables that don't grow very deep, like radishes or maybe even some smaller beets or turnips, you could do those in a reasonably shallow container. Something like the Vegepod, which is sort of a veg trug. Somebody asked about a veg trug, and those are similar type of thing where they're quite deep, but they have a relatively small footprint, so they're good for balconies. You could do root vegetables in those, and they'd have enough growing depth to reach down. And in fact, they'd be great if you have a self-watering one like this, because those roots, since they grow down fairly quickly, then they're going to be pulling the water up out of the reservoir quite efficiently. Do we have other questions, Nova?
Yeah, so I was just reviewing. I think that covers just about everything. Everything else you've spoken to within the workshop. And of course, in the resources we're going to provide after this, we will be able to provide you specific links to where Sandy has gotten some of her tools, or where you can find like things from stores in Toronto or online. But otherwise, are there any other questions that anyone has before we finish up?
And you can also, if you go to our Facebook page and put questions on there, it's like I'm one of the content people on the Facebook page, so I can see those, or Nova will see them and make sure that I see them, so that we can answer questions on there as well.
Yeah, we do also have plenty of resources on our website as well. That can also continue to provide you with tips and answers that you might need throughout your veggie garden growing.
And we have 2 upcoming workshops that are going to be outdoors, like in a garden. So you go in person and see those. And those are going to be done by somebody who's much better at gardening than I am. So he'd probably be able to answer a lot of great questions as well. So watch our Facebook page and other socials for more information on that. I think the first one is next week, Nova, or do you have some details on the date?
It is on May 14th at 1 p.m. in East York near Woodbine and Lumsden. If people want to show up in person, again, it is a free workshop as well. You'll find the registration links through our social media pages, either on Instagram or our website or on Facebook. So yeah, that is definitely open for people to attend as well. If you want further questions, or if you want to learn more from Derek, can't remember his last name, but he is
Barber, Derek Barber.
Derek Barber. He leads the Homestead TO organization, so he is very experienced in growing food. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great.
All righty.
All right. Well, hopefully I plan to be at the one next week, and I might actually video part of it if Derek is okay with that. So we might be able to put up some video from next week's workshop as well. If not, if you want to show up to that, say hi, and it's definitely get out there and get growing. You can do a lot of great stuff just on a balcony in your own little space. Thanks for attending.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.